Hey, thanks for stopping by Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. As always, make sure you're subscribed, checking out the bell icon down there, like, comment, and share. As you watch this video, I will be probably on my way home from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. While I'm recording this, it's actually Friday, June 11th, and I have been invited to speak at a Faith and Freedom rally in Chippewa Falls at the Lilydale Event Center. One of the conversations that I had with the lady who's organizing this Faith and Freedom rally, she had said that she had watched one of my videos. It's the video about the 10,000-foot overview of the Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates. And she'd said to me, and I'm paraphrasing everything that she said in a very long conversation down to kind of just a couple things. One, everything that you said in that speech, I believe, and two, we're not teaching this anymore. And so, like always on my Sunday videos, I try to have it be about specifically and explicitly about Christianity. Now, the channel itself, as everybody knows, I do try to come from a Christian perspective. I don't do a great job of it sometimes. I lose my temper. I'd like to call it righteous indignation, but I don't know that it always applies. I want to talk a little bit about the expectations of leaders today. And by leaders, I use that phrase. I don't like using it, but it's a phrase, it's a word that everybody recognizes when it comes to people in elected office or appointed offices. And as I do prefer to say it here in the context of the United States as a constitutional republic with the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, I do prefer to say appointed servants or elected servants, because here in the United States, God has seen fit to give us our ruling authority as the Constitution. It's our highest ruling authority here in the United States. And then, as I've pointed out, probably ad nauseum for most of you, then it's the Constitution, or then it's us, we the people, and then it's these others. And so for years, churches have been mishandling this. They've been getting it wrong. I had a faulty view for quite some time about passages like 1 Peter 2 and Romans 13 and other places. And what I want to point to now is that no matter what your perspective is on Romans 13, even if you're diametrically opposed to my interpretation of Romans 13, there is an expectation that we can impose on people in governmental positions, elected officers, appointed officers, leaders, if you will, in government. And that's what I really want people to understand. There again, no matter what your take, no matter what your interpretation of Romans 13, it is very clear that God has expectations for leaders. He does. It's a powerful and robust, not guideline. It's a powerful and robust underscoring of what God doesn't just expect. See, the problem with saying God's expectations for them is that, well, it was an expectation and they couldn't meet it, but they're still in charge. No, God's expectation is more than an expectation. It's a demand. It's a requirement. God demands that leaders be just. God demands that leaders be righteous. God demands that leaders do good. And that good that he demands of them is following his law. That's his expectation. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about theocracy and theonomy, and we were talking about how do we determine in society what's a law and what's not a law. And I said the problem is, and this has been talked about, if you've heard me talk about it at all, you will know that I strongly recommend that you all read the Christian Manifesto by Francis Schaeffer. phenomenal book. And in that book, he talks about the difference between objective law and sociological law. And sociological law is where we're at today. So even though we have an English common law system, we practice sociological law. In other words, society determines what the laws should look like and how they should look. And in that book, Schaeffer quotes Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a humanist, postmodernist, by, for lack of better terminology, who really did believe ultimately in the statement, I'm paraphrasing this as well, that ultimately good is determined by whatever nation has the ability to beat up everybody else. And that's sociological law. Okay. It doesn't work, because the rulers then can say, oh, well, this is good based on this sociological perspective. This is good based on this cultural perspective. And what we end up with there is really kind of a form of theocracy. It's really what it is. It's social theocracy, with the state as God, and executives and legislative branches and in the judiciary serving as the priesthood of the state. So it's impossible to avoid a theocratic system of governance in any nation. My friend Carter from Unsafe Space frequently, well, I shouldn't say frequently, but has said, and he did say in our conversation a month and a half ago now, that he calls most atheists statetheists, because they really do worship the state. They think the state is ultimately the arbiter of all things good, and how things should be handled and how things should be done. Sadly, most Christians are also stateists or statists. Most Christians today worship at the foot of the state. And as I've implied before, or flat out said before, and in my video about hirelings a couple of weeks ago, pastors and elders in many churches today advocate for people doing everything that the state says. And we saw that play out through the COOF restrictions. As governor after governor after governor handed down restrictions on churches, the churches just complied and went along. Even to the point of ending in-person corporate worship and narrating for the state, it's okay, you can worship corporately at home together. And wasn't that the line that we saw here in the state of Minnesota? At home together, at home safe together, things like that. But what we've allowed is this narrative that there's supposed to be a stark contrast between the state and between the church, or between religion, and that especially Christianity can have no influence on the state. And that has allowed for subjective sociological law to come in. And it's also allowed for subjective sociological standards for what makes a good ruler, what makes a good leader, what makes a good president or governor or city council member or a mayor or a chair of the county board, whatever the case might be. And the problem is that shifts, not just culturally and sociologically across the expanse of the United States, but that can shift from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, city to city, block to city block, and county to county. So that what this county board over here is doing might be perfectly fine. It could still be diametrically opposed to what this person up here at the state is doing, because sociologically and culturally, there's this amorphous, well, we can do whatever we think is right. And God's demand of every single person within government, if you're there again, I'm not going to debate you on at this point in time about what Romans 13 actually teaches, what 1 Peter 2 actually teaches. What I'm going to debate you on is, no matter what your perspective is, there's only one standard to judge what makes a ruler a good ruler and a just ruler, and that is the eternal moral law of God. Period. End of story. You can be an atheist, you can be agnostic, you can be Muslim, you can be Jewish, you can be Christian, you can be whatever you want to be. But if we hold our elected and appointed public servants to that standard, we can't fail. We cannot fail. And here's why. God's law is good. It's good. It is the basis for English common law. If you look at the inception and the history and the formation of English common law, it rises up from the Christian understanding of what God's law is, the eternal moral law of God. In that conversation I mentioned with this individual, we were talking about whether or not homosexuality should be made illegal. We were talking about, well, the Bible calls it a sin, so shouldn't it be illegal? And I said, adultery is already a sin. Therefore, if a state wanted to, they could, and there are states that have laws on the book against adultery that would cover all sexual sin. Now, I also said that I believe that criminalizing adultery and fornication is incredibly difficult because it requires the state to get involved in people's personal private lives in a way that they're not allowed to do. And that's where I talked about, I don't want a pure theocracy, because a pure theocracy is always going to end up in tyranny. And I despise tyranny. I despise it. As much as I respect my Puritan forefathers here in the United States, they did some things that were tyrannical and they were wrong. The Salem witch trials were a horrible, horrible, horrible travesty of justice. It was theocratic. Scriptures say, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. But look at what happened. And so I want you today on this video for Sunday, for those of you who are implicitly are Christian, who are coming from your pursuit of patriotism from a Christian perspective, who want to have a Christian grasp of the roots of this nation, want to have a Christian grasp for what drove this grand republic, this grand democratic experiment, if you will, this republicanism, this ideological liberty-loving nation. If you want to understand those Christian roots, then you have to fundamentally and pivotally and foundationally have to grasp that the only way for this nation to be ruled justly and rightly is for us to cling desperately to the law of God. The scriptures say in different ways in different places, and Ray Comfort from Living Waters and Way the Master likes to say that, quote, the passage that says the law of God is what drives us to salvation. And if that's true for the Christian, that it's God's law, it's the schoolmaster that drives us to salvation, drives us to repentance, then the law of God can also be good in keeping a state, a entity, a republic on the right track. If we honor it, if we abide by it, and we have to, as Christians, we need to demand that those that are in elected or appointed servants positions will themselves in turn honor the law of God. And some people who sound like you're talking about a litmus test. I might be. But tell me something. As you think about this, where are we as a nation? As we've devalued Christian thought, as we've devalued Christian theology, as we've devalued Christian philosophy, as we've devalued Christian core fundamentals of morality and right and wrong, good and evil, as we've devalued all of those things, as we've devalued God in this nation and yet claim, oh, God bless America, and sing all these patriotic so-called hymns, where are we in allowing a wedge to be driven between Christianity and governance? Where have we landed with that? And the church is complicit in that. The church, the visible church in the United States, has colluded with the anti-Christian forces to say, oh, we need to back off. Some of it looks like taking your 501c3 status and becoming tax exempt, and then agreeing to whatever standards they put on you. So you cannot advocate for certain political positions and certain political candidates from the pulpit. or as a congregation, because then they'll strip you of that 501c3. We have colluded, we have plotted with the very enemies of God to keep God out of our governance. And now we don't have now we have leaders that don't have to honor God. We have to understand this, because if we don't understand it, and if we don't push, if we don't fight as Christians to get that back, to start demanding those people that we put into positions to run for office, if we don't demand that they start to feel, or not, excuse me, not to feel that way, but to think that way, to reason that way, to legislate that way, it's going to get worse. And we have, as Christians, we have a right to demand that. The Muslims come in and they demand Sharia law. There are Jewish organizations that are demanding kosher laws. Christians have to stop being weak-kneed pansies, and they have to start demanding that God reign, if you will, over people in leadership positions. Because those who don't rule and reign according to how God defines what is good are not legitimate leaders according to God, and they can be deposed. So I want you to think about that today, and I want you to pray about where your heart is on this. You want to debate me on what Romans 13 means? I'll debate you. I'll sit down, we'll shoot a video, and we'll have that conversation. But you cannot deny, as a Christian, that fundamentally and foundationally at its core, God defines good and evil. God defines right and wrong. God defines moral and immoral. And he's given us his eternal moral law to understand those things by. And he demands that all leaders follow that to be good leaders. And he says when they don't honor that, they are no longer good leaders, and we do not have to obey them. And that's where we're at in this country. And you cannot win that debate if you take an opposing view to me on that one. Again, I love all of my Christian friends, fans, followers, whatever you want to call it. I love all my Christian patriots. I love everybody through Christ. But in particular, I want to push on my Christian friends. Make sure you're getting this right. Because if you're not getting this right, there's a very high likelihood you're getting it wrong in a sinful way. So until next time, do not worry about whether you are safe. Fight for your liberty. Fight for your freedom. And sic semper tyrannis. Soli Deo Gloria.